there are things physics simply does not allow. We understand the world through a set of rules. Gravity pulls down. Steel is harder than wood. A tree cannot consume a machine. These are the laws that keep us sane. They tell us that the ground beneath our feet is solid, and that the sky above is indifferent. But sometimes, the laws break. If you were to walk through the outskirts of San Justo in the province of Santa Fe, Argentina, in the days following January 1973, you might have stumbled across an object that would make you question your own sanity. Picture a tree, a massive, ancient eucalyptus. Its trunk is thick, scarred, solid hardwood. Now, picture a tractor engine. A Perkins 4-cylinder diesel block, cast iron, weighing hundreds of kilograms. A cold, dead, immovable lump of metal. Now, imagine the engine is inside the tree, not resting against it, not buried beneath it, but embedded, fused into the center of the trunk. To achieve this, to take a block of cast iron and drive it into fresh hardwood like a nail into soft pine, requires a force that the human mind struggles to calculate. It requires a velocity and a violence that belongs on other planets, not Earth. And certainly not a sleepy agricultural town in the middle of the Argentine summer. When engineers looked at that tree, they didn't just see destruction. They saw an anomaly. They saw a fingerprint left by something that shouldn't exist. Because in 1973, in the Southern Hemisphere, storms like this were considered myths. We are told that the monsters, the F4s, the F5s, the Finger of God tornadoes live in North America. They live in Oklahoma. They live in Kansas. They do not cross the equator. They do not hunt in the South. But on January 10th, the monster didn't care about geography. It didn't care about statistics. It was hungry. This is the story of the San Justo tornado, the only recorded F5 in the history of the Southern Hemisphere. A storm so powerful, it didn't just destroy a town, it sucked the water out of the swimming pools. It stripped the concrete from the foundations. It turned blades of grass into bullets, and it did all of this while the town was asleep. We are about to analyze the forensic timeline of a meteorological assassination. If you want to understand how nature can turn a breeze into a bomb, listen closely. Because before the wind screamed, it whispered. Let's go back. Let's dial the clock back to the morning of January 10th, 1973. To understand the horror of what happened at 2 p.m., you have to understand the torture of 10 a.m. The heat. Survivors don't talk about the wind first. They talk about the heat. It was oppressive. It was a physical weight. By mid-morning, the temperature in San Justo had already climbed past 35 degrees Celsius. By noon, it was pushing past 40. That's 104 degrees Fahrenheit. But numbers are cold. They don't tell you what it felt like. The air was thick, saturated. It was the kind of humidity that clings to your skin like a wet sheet. You breathe in, and the air feels hot in your lungs. It doesn't refresh you, it suffocates you. San Justo is a town of the plains, the Pampas. It is flat, endless, green, and on this day, the plains were baking. The locals describe a strange phenomenon, the calma chicha, a dead calm, a death acolyte, a dead kukai. Usually there is a breeze in Santa Fe. The wind moves through the soy fields, it rustles the leaves of the paraiso trees. But on January 10th, the wind died. The flags hung limp against the poles. The leaves stopped moving. The only sound was the buzzing of the cicadas, a relentless, electric screaming from the trees that seemed to get louder as the sun got higher. And in this heat, the town did what it always did. It shut down. This is a crucial piece of the puzzle. This is the cultural mechanism that turned a natural disaster into a massacre. In Argentina, specifically in the interior provinces, the siesta is not just a habit. It is a religion. When the sun hits its peak, when the heat becomes unbearable, the shutters come down. The shops lock their doors. The streets empty out. San Justo, a town of 12,000 people, effectively ceased to exist between 1 town and 4 p.m. Fathers came home from the fields, their shirts stained with sweat, looking for shade. Mothers closed the blinds to keep the house cool. Children were called inside, told to lie down, told to be quiet. By 1:30 p.m., the town was a ghost town, told to lie down, told to be quiet. By 1:30 p.m., imagine walking down the Boulevard Roque Sáenz Peña, the main spine of the city. It is wide, lined with beautiful tall trees, but at 1:30 p.m. it is empty, silent. You might hear the rhythmic click-click of a ceiling fan through an open window. You might hear the clinking of silverware on a plate, but you wouldn't see a soul. They were in the most vulnerable position possible. They were in their beds. They were in their pajamas. They were drifting into that heavy, heat-induced sleep, completely unaware that the atmosphere above them was building a weapon. Let's look at the sky. If you were a meteorologist standing in San Justo that afternoon, your blood would have run cold. You see, tornadoes are not random. They are the result of a very specific, very volatile, atmospheric recipe. And on January 10th, the ingredients were being mixed with terrifying precision. On the ground, you have this pool of incredibly hot, moist air. It wants to rise. It needs to rise. Heat rises. That is the rule. But above it, sitting at about 5,000 feet, was a layer of cold, dry air. A cap. Think of it like a lid on a boiling pot. The hot air below is pushing up. Pushing. Pushing. But the cold air lid is holding it down. The pressure is building. The energy is accumulating. It is a bomb waiting for a detonator. For hours, the cap held. The people of San Justo slept under this invisible ceiling of tension. They sweated in their sleep. They tossed and turned. The Liliana Sacco, she was there. She remembers the feeling. A sense of unease. A feeling that the air was too heavy. That something was wrong. But you dismiss it. You blame the heat. You blame the humidity. You don't think the sky is about to explode. This is the normalcy bias. It is the psychological shield that protects us from panic. We assume that today will be like yesterday. We assume that the clouds are just clouds. We assume that our house, our strong brick house, is a fortress. But the atmosphere doesn't care about your assumptions. 1:45 p.m. The lid begins to crack. Somewhere to the west, over the open fields, the hot air punches through the cap. And suddenly, explosively, it shoots upward. This isn't a cloud forming. This is a tower being built. In minutes, the cumulonimbus cloud explodes into the stratosphere. It goes from nothing to 50,000 feet high, an anvil of ice and wind towering over the planet. But on the ground, in the streets of San Justo, nobody sees the tower. They only see the shadow. The light begins to change. This is where the accounts get haunting. Survivors don't describe darkness. They don't describe black clouds. They describe a color that shouldn't be there. Violet. A deep, bruised purple. Imagine looking out your window. The sun is blocked. But the light filtering through isn't gray. It's the color of a hematoma. It's the color of bad blood. The sky turned purple because of the hail. Massive amounts of ice, suspended in the cloud, filtering the sunlight in a way that creates this surreal, alien glow. Then, the sound changed. The cicadas, those millions of insects screaming in the heat, they stopped. Instantly. Total. Silence. The birds stopped singing. The dogs, usually barking at the passing cars, went under the beds. They whimpered. Animals know. They can feel the pressure drop before we can. They can feel the vibration in the earth. And then came the smell. This is the detail that lingers. The detail that wakes survivors up in the middle of the night, 50 years later. Before the wind came the stench. Sulfur, rotten eggs. A chemical, acidic sting in the nose. Why sulfur? Rotten eggs. A chemical. acidic sting in the nose. Why such? Some say it was the sewage pipes bursting under the pressure change before the storm even hit. Others say it was the ozone, the electrical charge of the lightning frying the oxygen molecules in the air. But to the people of San Justo, it didn't smell like science. It smelled like hell. Liliana, she smelled it. She smelled it. She was inside. She smelled the rotten eggs and frowned. She thought maybe a gas line had leaked. She got up to check. She didn't know that she was smelling the breath of the beast. 2:02 p.m. The radar at the Piranha airport, 100 kilometers away, picks up a signal. A hook echo. A massive, rotating comma shape on the screen. But this is 1973. There are no cell phones. There is no Twitter. There is no emergency broadcast system linked to every pocket in the city. The meteorologists in Piranha see the monster. They see the rotation. They know what it means. But they can't scream loud enough. There is no hotline to the police station in San Justo. There is no siren on the roof of the municipality. The gun is cocked. The finger is on the trigger. And the target is sleeping. 2005 p.m. The wind begins. It starts not as a gust, but as a change in pressure. If you were there, you would have felt your ears pop, painfully. Like descending too fast in an airplane. The air pressure drops so plummeting low, so fast, that the air inside the houses suddenly had higher pressure than the air outside. The houses were trying to exhale. The curtains began to be sucked out of the windows. Not blown in, sucked out. Dust began to rise from the streets, not swirling, but levitating, rising straight up, as if gravity had been turned off. And then, the rumble. At first, it sounds like a tractor, a distant engine. Then, it sounds like a train, a freight train, heavily loaded, coming down the tracks. But there are no tracks on the boulevard. The noise grows. It deepens. It stops being a sound you hear with your ears, and starts being a sound you feel in your chest, a vibration, a resonance that rattles the teeth in your skull. Liliana looks out the window. She sees the purple sky. She sees the debris rising. And she sees it, the funnel. It isn't a thin rope-like tornado like you see in the movies. This is a wedge, a wall. It is 300 meters wide. It is a solid block of rotating coal-black destruction. And it isn't moving like a storm. It is moving like a storm. It is moving like a predator. It is heading straight for the center of town. She screams. She grabs her family into the bathroom, into the hallway. But where do you hide? Where do you hide when the atmosphere itself has decided to erase you? They run to the interior rooms. They huddle together. They cover their heads. The roar becomes deafening. It sounds like the earth is being ripped apart. It sounds like 1,000 grinding gears. This is the moment of no return. The normalcy bias shatters. The "it can't happen here" belief evaporates. There is no more siesta. There is no more heat. There is only the realization that they are trapped in a wooden box and a grinder is coming to eat them. The clock hits 2080 p.m. The monster of San Justo crosses the city limits, and the world ends. 2008 p.m. The edge of the wall hits. It doesn't knock. It doesn't ramp up. It simply arrives. Imagine you are standing on the sidewalk of Boulevard Roque San Pina. You are looking north. You see the purple-walled cloud consuming the horizon. You hear the freight train screaming in your ears. And then, the train hits you. The first thing that happens isn't the wind. It's the projectiles. Before the core of the tornado strikes, it throws a curtain of debris ahead of itself. It is a shotgun blast of gravel, roof tiles, branches, and glass. Survivors described it as sandblasting. But that word is too gentle. Sandblasting implies cleaning a brick wall. This was skin removal. The wind speed at the outer edge jumps instantly from 0 to 200 kilometers per hour, then to 300, then to 300, then to numbers that don't make sense. The air is filled with dust, yes, but that dust is moving at the speed of a bullet. Every grain of sand becomes a needle. Every pebble becomes a distinct, lethal projectile. If you were outside, if you were caught in the open, the air itself became a weapon. The air itself became a weapon. It scoured the paint off cars. It stripped the bark off trees until the wood underneath was white and polished. It stripped the clothes off people's backs. Inside the houses, the experience was different. Inside, it was about pressure. We talked about the implosion. Let's understand what that actually means. Liliana Sacco is huddled in the hallway. Her family is on the floor. The doors are locked. The windows are shut. The house is sealed tight against the heat of the afternoon. When the eye of the F5 passes over a structure, the atmospheric pressure outside drops by over 100 hectopascals in seconds. That is a violent, catastrophic vacuum. The air inside the house is still at normal pressure. It is pushing out, trying to equalize with the vacuum outside. The house inflates. Like a balloon being overfilled, the walls push outward. The roof pushes upward. The house doesn't blow down. It explodes. Liliana hears a sound like a gunshot. Crack. It's the windows. They don't shatter inward, spraying glass onto the floor. They blow outward into the yard. The frames are ripped from the brickwork. Then, the roof. She looks up. The ceiling. The heavy plaster, the beams, the chandelier. It all lifts. It doesn't crumble. It lifts. It doesn't crumble. One moment, there is a roof. The next, there is a gray, swirling void. And then, the noise changes. When the roof goes, the roar comes in. It is no longer muffled by walls. It is right there, on top of you. It sounds like a jet engine sitting on your chest. Liliana grabs the floor tiles. She grabs the door frame. She grabs anything, because suddenly, gravity feels different. She grabs anything, because suddenly, gravity feels different. The suction is so intense that heavy furniture begins to slide. The table slides across the room. The sofa tips over, and Liliana feels herself becoming light. Let's pause. We need to talk about the Mercedes-Benz dealership. This was a landmark in San Justo, a symbol of solidity. It was a massive structure, steel beams, reinforced concrete, heavy glass. Inside, there were brand new cars. Heavy glass. Inside, there were brand new cars. Heavy German engineering. Saloons. Trucks. Tractors. A tractor weighs thousands of kilograms. It is designed to pull plows through heavy earth. It is designed to be immovable. When the tornado hit the dealership, it didn't treat the tractors like machines. It treated them like leaves. Witnesses say the building didn't collapse. It disintegrated. The wind hit the dealership with a force estimated at over 450 kilometers per hour. At that speed, air acts like a fluid. It acts like water from a high-pressure hose. It hit the concrete walls and simply washed them away. And the cars, this is where the physics of San Justo becomes the stuff of nightmares. A car was found, 500 meters away, not rolled, not dragged, thrown. It was lofted into the air, carried over the rooftops of the town, and dropped like a toy car in a field. But the tractor engine, the one we mentioned in the beginning, that is the true testament to the violence. To embed an engine into a tree requires a specific sequence of events. First, the tornado has to rip the tractor apart. It has to shred the chassis, strip the wheels, and tear the heavy cast-iron engine block free from its mounts. Then, it has to lift that block. A dense, compact, heavy object. Then, it has to accelerate it. It has to spin it around the vortex, gathering speed around the vortex, gathering speed faster and faster, until it is moving at hundreds of kilometers per hour. And then, it has to line it up perfectly with a eucalyptus tree. And finally, impact. The force of that impact is celestial. It fuses the metal and the wood. It creates a sculpture of violence that stands as a monument to the day the laws of physics broke. Back to Liliana. The roof is gone. The walls are crumbling. She is exposed to the monster. She closes her eyes. She screams, but she cannot hear herself. The wind steals the sound right out of her throat. She feels debris hitting her. Pieces of her own home. Books. Plates. bricks. She is being dragged. The friction burns her skin. She is holding on to her family, but the wind is trying to peel them apart. It is a greedy thing. It wants to take them one by one. This is the blender. Inside the funnel, it is a soup of destruction. There are trees flying. There are mattresses. There are street signs. There are pieces of the church. And there are people. We have to acknowledge this. We have to look at it. People were lifted. Some were found blocks away. Some were found in the tops of trees. Some were never found at all. The wind didn't just move them. It stripped them. The medical reports from the aftermath, they are difficult to read. They describe abrasion. They describe bodies covered in mud so thick it looked like a second skin. They describe straw, simple dry straw from the fields, driven into telephone poles like nails. If a piece of straw can penetrate wood, imagine what it does to flesh. How long is 7 minutes? If you are waiting for a bus, it is nothing. If you are holding your breath, it is a long time. If you are inside an F5 tornado, it is an eternity. The storm moved through the town at about 60 kilometers per hour. But the rotation, the spin, was supersonic. It took roughly 7 minutes for the entire storm system to cross the city. But for any single house, for any single person, the peak violence lasted about 105 seconds. 1 minute and 45 seconds. Count it in your head. 1, 2, 3. Imagine the roar, the shaking, the debris. 10. The walls are gone. The world is gray and spinning. 20. You are praying. You are bargaining. You are promising God anything if it just stops. 30. It gets louder. It gets harder. 40. You can't breathe. The pressure drop is sucking the oxygen out of the air. You are gasping in a vacuum. 50. Your ears are ringing. The capillaries in your eyes are bursting from the pressure change. 60. A minute has passed, and it is still screaming. This is the psychological torture of the tornado. It doesn't strike and leave. It sits on you. It grinds you. It rotates over you, hitting you from the north, then the east, then the south, then the west. It attacks you from every angle. For Liliana, those 105 seconds dismantled her life. She felt the structure of her reality tearing apart. Not just her house, her sense of safety, her history. The photos on the wall, the clothes in the closet, the food in the pantry, all of it sucked up into the sky to be scattered over the pampas. And then, the color. Witnesses inside the vortex. Those who dared to open their eyes saw the color of the wind. It wasn't just gray. It was red. Red from the brick dust. Red from the prick dust. Red from the soil of the fields. Red from the blood. It was a swirling, opaque column of pulverized matter. A thick, choking slurry of everything that used to be San Justo. Let's go deeper into the strangeness. Tornadoes are capricious. They are chaotic. In the middle of this apocalypse, there were moments of impossible delicacy. A house on the corner of the boulevard was completely leveled. Foundations wiped clean. The family inside killed. But on the kitchen table, which was left standing in the open air, a glass of water sat undisturbed. Not a drop spilled. How? How does a force that can twist steel beams leave a glass of water alone? It's the microvortices. Inside the main funnel, there are smaller, tighter tornadoes spinning around the center. Like gears inside a watch, if you are hit by a microvortex, you are erased. If you are missed by one, you might be left untouched, while the world around you vanishes. This is the cruelty of the storm. It chooses. It discriminates. One side of the street is a war zone. The other side still has flowers in the garden. A survivor found his car. A Fiat 600, compressed into a ball of metal larger than a suitcase. He didn't recognize it. He walked past it 3 times before he saw the license plate. Another survivor found a record player, gently placed on the sidewalk, plugged into nothing, the needle still resting on the vinyl. It is these details that break the mind. The brain cannot process the logic. It looks for a pattern, but there is no pattern. There is only chaos, and the sound, we must return to the sound. Survivors say it wasn't just a roar. It was a scream. It was the sound of wood splintering. Millions of boards snapping at once. It was the sound of glass atomizing. It was the sound of metal tearing. Have you ever heard metal tear? It shrieks. It sounds like an animal in pain. Now multiply that by an entire city. The grid of the city, the electrical lines, they went down in the first seconds. The live wires danced in the wind, sparking, adding flashes of blue and white to the purple dark. Transformers exploded like bombs. Boom, boom, boom. To someone watching from the fields outside of town, it looked like the city was being carpet-bombed. Flashes of light inside a dark, rotating tower. But inside, it was just the dark. 2:13 p.m. The storm is now directly over the heart of the city. The Boulevard Roque Sans Peña, the pride of San Justo, is being operated on. The trees, those beautiful 80-year-old trees, are being pulled out by the roots. Not snapped. Pulled. The soil is churning. The pavement is being ripped up in chunks. The tornado is digging a trench through the town. It is a scouring pad, rubbing the city off the map. Liliana is no longer thinking. She is no longer hoping. She is existing in a state of pure, primal shock. She is a biological object reacting to stimulus. She covers her head. She curls into a ball. She waits for the end. She feels a heavy weight land on her. Is it a wall? Is it a beam? She can't breathe. The dust is clogging her nose. The sulfur smell is overwhelming. It tastes like copper. It tastes like blood. The noise is at its absolute peak. It is a physical pressure inside her skull. It feels like her head is going to explode, and then silence. Not a tapering off. Not a gradual fade. Instant silence. The tornado lifts. Just as quickly as it dropped, the funnel withdraws back into the cloud. The finger of God retracts. The wind stops. The roar vanishes. And what is left is the void. This silence is louder than the storm. It is a heavy, ringing, suffocating silence. For a few seconds, nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The survivors are waiting for the second wave. They are waiting for the noise to come back, but it doesn't. The sun, the bright, hot, summer sun, comes back out. The purple clouds move on, racing towards the river, carrying the debris of the town with them, and the light floods the scene. Liliana opens her eyes. She coughs. She spits out mud. She tries to stand up. She pushes the debris off her legs. She looks around. She is not in her hallway. She is in the open air. She looks for the ceiling. It's gone. She looks for the walls. They are mounds of brick. She looks for the street, and she doesn't recognize it. It looks like the surface of Mars. It is brown. Everything is brown. The trees are gone. The landmarks are gone. The signs are gone. There is no color left in the world. Just mud and ruin. She stands up, shaking, and she hears the first sound. It isn't a siren. It isn't a voice. It is a bird, a single bird, chirping in the sudden, terrifying calm. And then the screaming begins. The wind has stopped. The roaring freight train has dissolved into the humid air. The violet clouds are retreating to the southeast, dragging their shadow across the Paraná River. And in San Justo, the sun is shining. It is true. The sun is shining. It is teased. The temperature is still 40 degrees Celsius. The humidity is still suffocating. But the town is gone. Survivors who crawled out of the rubble described a sensation that goes beyond fear. It was cognitive dissonance, a complete inability to reconcile what their eyes were seeing with what their brains knew to be true. 10 minutes ago, they were in a thriving agricultural city. They were in their bedrooms. They were in their kitchens. There were streets. There were signs. There were trees that had stood for a century. Now, they were standing on a mudflat. The most striking detail of the immediate aftermath was the color. Everything was brown. The tornado had stripped the vegetation so violently that the chlorophyll was gone. The leaves were pulverized. The grass was ripped out by the roots. The soil, the rich, dark earth of the pampas had been churned up and plastered over every vertical surface. Survivors looked like clay statues. They were coated in a thick, wet layer of mud. Their eyes were white circles in brown faces. Liliana stands up in what used to be her living room. She spins around, looking for a reference point. A landmark. "Where is the church?" she whispers. She can't see it. Where is the boulevard? She can't find it. The geography of the town had been erased. The debris piles were 2-3 meters high, creating new, chaotic hills where flat streets used to be. This is the Martian landscape. It is a world without familiar shapes. A car is not a car anymore. It is a twisted knot of steel. A house is not a house. It is a pile of bricks. And the silence continues to hold. For the first few minutes, the shock is absolute. The brain shuts down. It is a biological defense mechanism. If you fully understood what had just happened, you might die of grief on the spot. So the brain numbs you. People began to walk. They walked aimlessly. They climbed over the mountains of brick and wood. They didn't speak. They didn't scream. Not yet. They walked like zombies. One survivor remembers seeing a man sitting on a pile of rubble, holding a telephone receiver. Just the receiver. The cord was cut. The phone was gone. The house was gone. But he was holding it to his ear, listening to the dial tone that wasn't there. Another saw a woman sweeping. She was standing on a slab of concrete, the only part of her home left, and she was sweeping the dust off it with a broken branch. It was a desperate attempt to impose order on chaos, to do something normal. And then, the capriciousness of the wind revealed itself again. The cruel humor of the tornado, in the middle of a block that had been leveled to the foundations, where neighbors lay dead under tons of masonry. A dining table stood untouched. The plates were set. The napkins were folded. A bottle of wine sat in the center, upright. The storm had ripped the walls down, torn the roof off, and killed the inhabitants. But it hadn't knocked over the wine. This image haunted the rescue workers. It suggested a terrifying precision. It suggested that the storm chose what to take and what to leave. 2:30 p.m. The shock begins to wear off. The adrenaline fades, and the pain arrives. The silence breaks. It starts as a low murmur. Then a shout. Then a chorus of screams. "Help me, Mama! My legs! I can't feel my legs!" The sound rises from the rubble like steam. It comes from everywhere. It comes from under the bricks. It comes from the twisted carcasses of cars. The survivors who can walk begin to dig. They dig with their bare hands. They tear at the jagged wood and the hot bricks. Their fingers bleed, but they don't feel it. Liliana finds her family. They are battered. They are covered in cuts. But they are alive. Others are not so lucky. This is where we must confront the gore. But we will not look at it directly. We will look at it through the eyes of the doctors. The local hospital in San Justo was damaged, but functional. The staff, they were not ready. No one could be ready. Within 30 minutes, the first wave of wounded arrived. They didn't come in ambulances. The ambulances were destroyed. They came in the beds of pickup trucks. They came on doors used as stretchers. They were carried in the arms of neighbors. The doctors saw injuries that they had never seen before. These weren't car crash injuries. These were war injuries, but worse. The sandblasting effect. We mentioned it in Act 2, but let's understand the medical reality. The wind was moving at 400, maybe 500 kilometers per hour. It was carrying millions of particles of sand, glass, and soil. When that hits human skin, it acts like sandpaper. Patients arrived with their skin effectively scrubbed off. They were raw. They were bleeding from a million tiny pores. And the debris. The doctors found things embedded in the bodies of the victims that defied logic. Straw. Simple, dry yellow straw from the wheat fields. Driven into arms. Driven into legs. Driven into skulls. The velocity was so high that the straw became rigid. It pierced muscle and bone like a hypodermic needle. The doctors had to remove splinters of wood that were microscopically small, yet deeply embedded. They had to clean wounds that were packed with mud that had been injected into the body by the pressure. Infection was the immediate enemy. The mud was full of bacteria. The sulfur smell, that rotten egg stench. It clung to the wounds. It clung to the clothes. The hospital became a scene from Dante's Inferno. There was no electricity. The power lines were gone. The backup generators were choked with dust. The doctors worked by the light of flashlights, by the light of candles. They ran out of anesthetic. They ran out of bandages. They used sheets. They used tablecloths. And they had to triage. They had to look at a child. And they had to look at a child crushed by a wall, and decide if they could save them, or if they had to move to the next person. The black tag, the mark of the hopeless. There were many black tags that afternoon in San Justo. Outside, the rescuers were facing a logistical nightmare. The police arrived from neighboring towns. The firefighters came from Santa Fe City. But when they got to San Justo, they stopped. They had maps. They knew the city grid. But the grid was gone. "Where is Boulevard Roque Sans Peña?" the captain shouted. A local, covered in mud, pointed to a wasteland of debris. "You are standing on it." They couldn't drive down the streets. The streets were blocked by fallen trees, by roofs, by cars that had been thrown from 3 blocks away. They had to walk. They had to climb. And as the sun began to set, as the darkness returned, the horror deepened. Without streetlights, the ruins became a labyrinth of shadows. Rescuers used torches. The beams of light cut through the dust, illuminating hands reaching out from the rubble. "Here! Over here!" Every time they moved a beam, the pile shifted. Every time they lifted a brick, they risked collapsing the pocket, where a survivor might be breathing. It was a delicate, agonizing game of Jenga, played with human lives in the dark, in the suffocating heat. The sun rose on January 11th. It illuminated a tragedy. 63 dead. Over 200 severely injured. A scar cut through the heart of the town, 300 meters wide and kilometers long. But as the funerals began, another group of people arrived. The scientists. The meteorologists. The meteorologists. They came from Buenos Aires. They came with cameras. They came with notebooks. They came to answer the question that was on everyone's lips. What was that? It couldn't have been a tornado. Tornadoes don't happen here. Not like this. They walked the path of the storm. They acted like detectives at a crime scene. The wind left fingerprints, one researcher said. We just have to learn how to read them. They looked at the trees. The eucalyptus trees, the ones that weren't ripped out, were twisted, not snapped. Twisted. Like a wet towel being wrung out. This told them about the rotation. It was cyclonic, counterclockwise, violent. They looked at the direction of the debris fall. In a straight-line windstorm, a derrico. All the trees fall in the same direction, like dominoes. Here, the trees fell in a spiral. They crisscrossed. Convergence, the scientists noted. The wind was sucking everything toward a center point. And then, they found the engine. We returned to the impossible object, the tractor engine in the tree. The lead investigator stood before it. He touched the cold iron. He touched the wood. He did the math in his head. To lift a 300-kilogram block, you need wind speeds of at least 300 kilometers/h. To accelerate it, you need more. To embed it, to fuse it, you need forces that approach the speed of sound. This was the smoking gun. This was the evidence that elevated San Justo from a tragedy to a meteorological anomaly. They opened the Fujita scale books. F1, moderate damage. Roofs peeled. F2, considerable damage. Mobile homes demolished. F3, severe damage. Trains overturned. F4, devastating damage. Houses leveled. And then F5. Incredible damage. Strong frame houses leveled off foundations and swept away. Automobile-sized missiles fly through the air in excess of 100 meters. Trees debarked. They looked at the Mercedes dealership. Leveled, swept away. They looked at the cars. Missiles. They looked at the trees. Debarked. There was no debate. They wrote it down in the official log. San Justo, Santa Fe, January 10, 1973. Classification F5. It remains to this day the only undisputed F5 in the Southern Hemisphere. Why? Why San Justo? The investigation revealed a perfect storm of coincidences. The Pasillo de los Tornados, the tornado corridor of South America. It runs through Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil. It is the second most active tornado region in the world after the U.S. plains, but usually the storms here are F1s. Maybe an F2. On that day, the atmosphere cheated. The cold air from the Andes Mountains clashed perfectly with the hot, humid air from the Amazon jungle. They met exactly over San Justo. The cap we spoke about, that lid of warm air, held the energy down until it was nuclear. And the time of day, 2 p.m. Maximum solar heating. Maximum solar heating. Maximum instability. If the storm had formed at 6 p.m., it might have been an F3. If it had formed at 6 p.m., it might have been an F3. If it had formed at the exact moment of peak energy, it was a black swan event, a statistical impossibility that happened anyway. The rubble was cleared. It took weeks, months. The army came in with bulldozers. They pushed the remains of the city into trucks and hauled it away. New bricks were laid. New roofs were built. The boulevard was replanted. Today, if you walk down the Boulevard Roxanne Peña, it looks beautiful. It is shady. It is green. The shops are open. The people are drinking coffee. But if you look closely, you can see the scars, not on the buildings, on the people. The psychological impact of the San Justo tornado is a case study in collective trauma. They call it tornadophobia. For a generation of children who grew up in the 70s in Santa Fe, the sky is not a friend. It is a threat. Interview a survivor today. They are in their 60s, 70s, 80s. Ask them about the color purple. They will stop smiling. They will look out the window. "We don't like that color," one woman says. "When the clouds get dark, when they get that bruise color, my hands start to shake. I can't help it. My body remembers." They have a heightened sensitivity to pressure. Many survivors claim they can feel a storm coming before the radar sees it. Their ears pop. Their heads ache. They are human barometers, calibrated by trauma. And there are legends. Every disaster spawns ghosts. In San Justo, they talk about the Hotel California effect. Not the song, but the feeling. The idea that some part of the town never left 1973. There are stories of a woman in a white dress seen walking the boulevard at 2 p.m. on hot summer days looking for her children. There are stories of the phantom roar. On the anniversary, January 10th, at exactly 2:15 p.m., people swear they can hear a low rumble in the distance. A train that never arrives. Is it real? Or is it the collective memory of a town that looked into the abyss? Perhaps it doesn't matter. The fear is real. The legacy of the storm is not just in the history books. It is in the architecture. Look at the new houses in San Justo. They are built differently. Thicker walls, smaller windows, reinforced concrete roofs. They are bunkers disguised as homes. They are built by people who know that the wind can turn solid objects into dust. They are built by people who no longer believe in the normalcy bias. They know that the monster is out there, sleeping, waiting. So, what do we learn from San Justo? We live in an age of technology. We have Doppler radar. We have satellites. We have sirens on our phones that scream at us when danger is near. We feel safe. We feel that we have conquered nature. We have mapped it, categorized it, and predicted it. But the story of January 10th, 1973 is a humble reminder of our actual place in the hierarchy. We are small. We build our cities on the skin of a volatile, violent planet. We exist by the grace of a stable atmosphere. But that stability is fragile. All it takes is a few degrees of temperature, a shift in the wind, a collision of air masses, and suddenly the rules change. Suddenly, engines fly, trees eat metal, and cities vanish. The San Justo tornado was an assassination. It was a precise, brutal, and efficient strike. It came when they were sleeping. It hit them with the force of a nuclear bomb, and it left nothing behind but questions. Liliana Sacco survived. She rebuilt her home. She raised her family, but she never took a nap during the siesta again. She sat on her porch. She watched the horizon. She watched the clouds build up in the summer heat. And she listened. Because she knew the truth. Nature usually gives a warning. A drop in pressure. A shift in the wind. A dark cloud. But sometimes the wind doesn't knock. Sometimes it just walks in.